Now, the other day I read one of the more interesting articles discussing Star Wars and the Jedi that I've ever come across, or that's ever been pointed out to me, since many people sent it my way. One that, at first, you think has to be satire, and therefore is rather funny, but then you realize it's not, they're being serious, and it just kind of becomes sad. And the article in question is one over on the Scientific American website, of all places, that's titled, "Why the Term Jedi is Problematic for Describing Programs That Promote Justice, Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion." And basically, just as the name implies, it's an argument citing 5 reasons why it's not a good idea to associate Star Wars and or the term or name Jedi, even though it makes the perfect acronym, with real-world initiatives, that it could have unwanted consequences that range from misconstruing the intent to promoting and profiting Disney, the company that of course owns Star Wars, and that, as they say in the article, has a problematic and troubling past. And though I can see why perhaps they wouldn't want to associate with Star Wars because they don't want to promote the intellectual property of some mega corporation, I can get that, it's fine I suppose. It's their attack on the Jedi that I take exception to, and that I will, mainly for the fun of it, argue against here. And so what I'll do now is read the first of their 5 arguments, the one that specifically deals with the Jedi and the problems with them, and then I'll counter it. And if you want to check out the whole article, if you want to read all 5 reasons they think Star Wars is bad and any association with it should be avoided, a link to it will be in the description below. Anyway, this article said, "Although they're ostensibly heroes within the Star Wars universe, the Jedi are inappropriate symbols for justice work. They are a religious order of intergalactic police monks prone to white saviorism and toxically masculine approaches to conflict resolution, violent duels with phallic lightsabers, gaslighting by means of Jedi mind tricks, etc. The Jedi are also an exclusionary cult, membership to which is partly predicated on the possession of heightened psychic and physical abilities, or Force sensitivity. Strikingly, Force-wielding talents are narratively explained in Star Wars not merely in spiritual terms, but also in ableist and eugenic ones. These supernatural powers are naturalized as biological, hereditary attributes, so it is that Force potential is framed as a dynastic property of noble bloodlines, for example, the Skywalker dynasty, and Force disparities are rendered innate physical properties measurable via midichlorian counts, not unlike a Force genetics test, and augments via humanoid engineering. The heroic Jedi are thus emblems for a host of dangerously reactionary values and assumptions. Sending the message that justice work is akin to cosplay is bad enough. Dressing up our initiatives in the symbolic garb of the Jedi is worse." Okay, so in the very first line of this argument, they're basically acknowledging that this is purely fictional, that Star Wars obviously is not real, but that within the context of it, the Jedi are the heroes of the story. And so if they'd instead said something after that opening statement like, "We just don't want our real-world initiative to be related to something overtly fictional," I might find it a bit odd, especially considering within the context of Star Wars, the Jedi are the guardians of peace and justice, they are the heroes, but I could still see their point, I could respect that. In fact, I kind of agree with their argument here, but in reverse. I don't think we should be making sure fictional stories or fictional factions within them, like the Jedi, are necessarily holding stringently true to real-world values or ideals, especially when you consider they're not dealing with real-world factors in these stories. They're dealing with things like the Force, that, of course, does not exist in our reality. There is no literal and objectively real and omnipresent, Force that has a discernible light side and dark side to it, or a good side and an evil side, that can hold sway over and influence the actions of individuals. Which is something that you would think scientists, and I'm assuming this was written by scientists, there were many writers credited for this, would immediately realize and thus recognize the absurdity of their argument that follows. Because again, not only in that first line do they acknowledge this is fictional and that the Jedi are heroes in the context, but they go on to judge them outside of that context. They judge their actions and practices based not on in-universe factors, but on those of our own reality, which doesn't sound like a very scientific method, does it? They're upset that, as they put it, the Jedi act like religious intergalactic police monks that often resolve their issues with weapons that vaguely resemble a male body part, while failing to point out the primary reason for their existence in the first place, which is to counter the threat of, again, a literal dark side and those that would use it to enslave the galaxy, which is something you'd think an initiative about inclusion and fair treatment could kind of get behind. And though yes, the Jedi are clearly fallible as seen in the prequels, though I'd also point out that everyone, even the most educated and well-meaning scientist, is also fallible, I'd argue that their intent, the Jedi's intent, as is the case with a well-meaning scientist, is always good and noble, even if the results aren't always optimal, and that the fact that the Jedi Order stood for 1,000 generations, or roughly 25,000 years, as the guardians of peace and justice of the Republic, that has to be worth something, that has to show their value. Especially when you consider, again, that the Jedi do not exist in some sort of isolation or without cause or purpose. They exist to oppose the Sith, to do what they must to stop them, because the Sith will not only do what they must to take control of the galaxy or what they want, but will do horrible things when they do achieve this goal. We saw the results of the Jedi's absence in the original trilogy when they were not there to counter the threat of the Sith. We saw the horrors brought on by a galaxy ruled by them. Yet another thing that must be kept in mind is that the Jedi only act when and where needed, or when called upon by the Republic that they serve. They are driven by compassion, by a desire to help anyone and everyone they can. They want to see all treated fairly and to live in peace. They have no interest in imposing their will upon any single populace or the galaxy itself. And so, though, yes, if you wanted to, you could argue our real world does not need police monks that fight with laser swords, implying there is something wrong with their existence in a galaxy where they are not only doing tremendous good, but fight literal evil with those phallic laser swords, is a completely unfair assessment of what they are and what they do, or the good they serve in their own context. Then there's the strange argument made that the Jedi are exclusionary based on psychic and physical abilities, which not only disregards what they may be called upon to do, which could be anything from simply helping a random individual in any number of unfortunate circumstances, to again fighting a Sith who will also have enhanced abilities, but it also makes it sound like this is not a reality in the world in which we live, as if the scientific community itself does not exclude based on such things as intelligence or mental acuity. Which is not a bad thing by any stretch. I'd certainly argue we want the best and brightest minds working on any number of real-world problems, as someone would if they were, say, trapped in a burning building. They would want a physically strong or athletic person to come and potentially rescue them. As those in the Star Wars galaxy, again, where the Force is real, they would want a Jedi, someone with the ability to wield that Force to do battle against the Sith who is also wielding it in order to safeguard the galaxy. Simply put, not just anyone can do these jobs. Not just anyone can be a scientist or a firefighter, which is not to say there's anything inherently wrong with someone who does not possess the mental or physical gifts to do these things. They may have other gifts to fill other roles within society, of course. Nor should we, obviously, I think, in any way look down upon someone who is born with an incredible gift, be that an amazing intellect belonging to someone that goes on to be a world-renowned scientist and helps humanity, or someone with an incredible physical ability that perhaps becomes a world-class athlete that entertains millions, if not billions, around the globe. And so at the same time, there is nothing inherently wrong with someone who happens to be born Force-sensitive, and to say otherwise, especially when we're talking about inclusion here, sounds an awful lot like discrimination, that we're judging based on an unasked-for immutable trait. No one chooses to be Force-sensitive at birth, it just happens at random. Even the rare exceptions of it being hereditary, keeping in mind they are rare and not the norm, does not mean someone born with Force sensitivity that has been passed down to them should be judged or persecuted in any way. And so I would ask, how is it really all that different, outside of the what we could call supernatural origin of the gift, for someone who is born Force sensitive and then goes on to become a Jedi to selflessly serve the greater good? How is that really all that different than the individual born with a brilliant mind who goes on to become a scientist and helps the world that way? In fact, with their abilities being supernatural in origin, which yes does or would give them an advantage over virtually anyone and everyone else in the galaxy, shouldn't the Jedi be nothing but celebrated for not exploiting that as the Sith do? Which begins to touch on the commitment it takes to be a Jedi. They sacrifice everything else for the sake of others, for the sake of that greater good. which also begins to touch on the training and honing of their skill that is required, well, for most Jedi anyway, to be a Jedi, which we could say is the equivalent of a scientist or athlete and their training, their honing of their body and or mind to accomplish what we could even say they were meant to do. This article makes it sound like being a Jedi is nothing but a gift granted them, and that they don't work for it, and they don't use it to the fullest, but they do the opposite. They use it to the fullest, and not for themselves, but instead for others. And so one might almost come to the conclusion here that it would be an honor to be named after an organization of gifted individuals who never think of exploiting that gift for their own gain, but only think of what they can do to serve others. So maybe it's not the Jedi who don't deserve to be named after this inclusion initiative. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe they're not good enough for the Jedi name. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. This video, again, meant in good fun, and hopefully it was enjoyed that way. Either way, let me know what you think about this article in the comments below. Do you agree, do you disagree, or do you find it ridiculous and not worth further discussion? Whatever the case may be, do leave that comment below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.